Hi there, my name is Saad Abdurrahman, and thank you for tuning into this video on the MoU between Ethiopia and Somaliland. In this video, I'll be exploring the implications that it has not just only on Somaliland and Ethiopia, but also what change it could have on the greater geopolitical frame of the region. On January 1st, 2024, President Musa Bihi of Somaliland and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia signed a groundbreaking agreement called the Memorandum of Understanding in Addis Ababa. This agreement grants Ethiopia access to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, while Somaliland will lease 20 kilometers of coastline to Ethiopia. In exchange, Ethiopia will recognize Somaliland's independence and receive a stake in the Ethiopian Airlines. This deal could significantly change the status of Ethiopia as a landlocked country and Somaliland's status as a de facto state. However, Somalia's government has declared that the deal is null and void, arguing it violates Somalia's territorial integrity. Somaliland, on the other hand, views it as a diplomatic milestone. Historically, Somaliland and Somalia were separate sovereign states before uniting in 1960, a union that dissolved in 1991. International reactions have varied, with multilateral organizations such as IGAD, the African Union, the EU, the Arab League, and the OIC calling for diplomatic dialogue, while major powers such as the US, the UK, and others have reaffirmed Somalia's territorial integrity. In this video, we will explore how the Ethiopian-Somaliland Memorandum of Understanding marks a turning point for both countries, with Somaliland potentially gaining international recognition, a long-standing goal of the country, and Ethiopia securing crucial maritime access that they haven't had since Eritrea broke off in 1991. The success of this agreement could shape the future of regional integration and cooperation in the Horn of Africa. Somaliland, formerly a British protectorate, was governed by the British Empire from 1887 until it gained independence on June 26, 1960. During colonial times, Somali territory was divided into five entities: British Somaliland, Italian Somalia, French Somaliland, the Ogaden, which is now a part of Ethiopia, and the Northern Frontier District, which is now a part of Kenya. A pan-Somali movement sought to unite the territories into a single Somali nation-state. Consequently, on July 1st, 1960, Somaliland, despite being an internationally recognized sovereign state for 6 days, united with Italian Somaliland to form the Somali Republic, aiming to incorporate the remaining territories into a greater Somalia. However, the Act of Union between Somaliland and Somalia was never ratified by Parliament, raising legal questions about its legitimacy under international law. In 2005, the African Union acknowledged the issue, stating that the Union's lack of ratification and subsequent dysfunction justifies Somaliland's search for recognition. On May 18, 1991, following a decade-long war, Somaliland declared the dissolution of the Union and reasserted its sovereignty based on the pre-1960 borders. Meanwhile, Somalia descended into violence and political disorder, lacking an internationally recognized government until 2012. In 2012, the UK initiated talks between Somaliland and Somalia, leading to 12 rounds of discussion over a decade in various locations, including the UAE, Turkey, and Djibouti. However, these talks were unproductive due to Somalia's lack of commitment. The most recent meeting in Djibouti on December 28, 2023, ended with an agreement to discuss unity and separation issues. Shortly after, President Musa Bihi of Somaliland reached an agreement with Ethiopia, offering Ethiopia at least over 20 kilometers of Somaliland coastal line in exchange for recognition. Somalia contested this agreement, claiming Somaliland is part of Somalia and cannot enter into such pacts independently. Nonetheless, Somaliland has operated as an independent de facto state since 1991. Somaliland has sought international recognition for over 30 years, facing obstacles such as Somalia's opposition, IGAD's reluctance to support separatist movements, the African Union's rigid border policies, and the geopolitical landscape favoring a unified Somalia. Despite these challenges, Somaliland gained de facto legitimacy through cooperation on counterterrorism, anti-piracy, and migration, as well as humanitarian issues. However, with Somalia's federal government gaining international support since 2012, Somaliland's sovereignty seemed at risk. The MoU with Ethiopia marks a significant step towards recognition, demonstrating Somaliland's capacity for direct bilateral diplomacy and boosting regional economic integration.
As a member of the technical committee which the president have appointed, our task was to look into the MoU that the president have signed with Ethiopia. Our task was to formulate what that framework agreement is going to look like by looking into the MoU agreement that the two leaders have signed, and making sure that all the aspects of the areas that the Somaliland is looking to collaborate with Ethiopia are mentioned in that agreement. Making sure, equally also important was to make sure that the agreements that we are signing are in line with our values, are also not contradicting with our communities and how our communities view it. So part of that, our work was to do a consultations meeting with the local communities, stakeholders like the members of parliament, members of the upper house, the political opposition parties, and all the aspect of members within the community, the religious leaders, the business leaders, the civil society. We have, spent, considerable time visiting all the regional areas where this military base is most likely going to be based. We have spent time with, discussing the community in that area, what their expectation is, what are their concerns, and how do they view this? What would they like to see in the MoU? And we've taken all of this into the considerations and make sure that the draft agreement that we are preparing reflects these important things that the community is looking for, and also at the same time reassure the community that if there are specific areas that they are worried about, that the government will look into it and make sure that the final agreement is in line with what our country and our people are looking for in the near future.
Ethiopia's quest for sea access is crucial for regional security, cooperation, and economic integration in the Horn of Africa. Ethiopia seeks access to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden to boost economic prosperity and secure its trade routes. Excessive port charges paid to neighboring countries have hindered Ethiopia's growth. Djibouti's port alone is responsible for 90% of Ethiopia's imports. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed highlighted that the money spent on these charges could build the Renaissance Dam every 3 years. Thus, Ethiopia initiated diplomatic talks with Eritrea, Somalia, Djibouti, Kenya, and Somaliland, focusing on establishing a naval base and diversifying commercial port use. While most countries couldn't agree, Somaliland saw this as an opportunity to gain international recognition. The revitalization of Berbera port through UAE investment further solidified the economic partnership between Ethiopia and Somaliland.
Yeah, Ethiopia has huge populations. I think they currently are the second most populated country in Africa, other than Nigeria. And that's going to grow. As I mentioned earlier, into 2050, it's estimated that that number is going to double to 180 million. It has huge economic growth. So both of that means that Ethiopia needs to have access to port in order for them to maintain that growth and to achieve that their objective.
The Ethiopia-Somaliland MoU marks a significant shift in the geopolitical landscape of the Horn of Africa. However, it also faces significant opposition from various quarters, including Al-Shabaab, Somalia, Egypt, and Djibouti. Each of these entities perceives the deal as a threat to their strategic interests and regional influence. Somalia believes that Somaliland is part of its sovereign territory, and thus Ethiopia is making an agreement with a part of its own territory without its consent. Since we've spoken about Somalia throughout this presentation, I would like to focus more on an entity that is operating out of Somalia, which isn't the official government, which is also in opposition to this deal, and that is Al Shabaab. Al Shabaab is an extremist group affiliated with Al Qaeda and is prevalent in Somalia. It has pledged to launch attacks against Somaliland and Ethiopia in an effort to prevent the Ethiopian-Somaliland Agreement. The group's spokesperson, Ali Rage, also known as Ali Dere, invoked religious themes and historical events in Islam, connecting Israel and Ethiopia in a campaign of expansionism.
Ethiopia plays a significant part in the region, and especially in Somalia, where the international community and the African Union forces is fighting with Al Shabaab. Ethiopia is the country that has the highest number of military there, helping the government of Somalia to maintain peace and security.
In contrast to Somalia, where it wields control over significant portions of the territory, Al Shabaab maintains no physical foothold in Somaliland. Somaliland has spent most of its existence working to make sure that Al Shabaab doesn't gain any foothold in its territories and create the same terror that has been seen throughout Somalia for most of this century. Nevertheless, dormant cells and inactive individuals would likely be prepared to serve Al Shabaab if they are to launch an attack on Somaliland. Over the past 3 decades, Djibouti has significantly benefited from Somaliland's lack of international recognition, positioning itself as their sole strategic power in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. The absence of a strategic rivalry has allowed Djibouti to capitalize on both Ethiopia's reliance for access to the sea and its strategic, military, and commercial importance to great powers such as the United States, China, and France, as an African gateway to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Ethiopia's heavy dependence on Djibouti for access to the sea is reflected in the fact that over 95% of Ethiopia's maritime trade is funneled through Djibouti, generating revenue of over $1 billion for the country. This strategic cooperation among Somaliland, the UAE, and Ethiopia has repositioned Somaliland's rivalry with Djibouti, creating tensions over the future power dynamics in the Horn of Africa. Djibouti was caught off guard by the announcement of the Ethiopian-Somaliland MoU, which has further strengthened the relationship between Somaliland and Djibouti. Nevertheless, Djibouti has not taken an official position on the matter and has proposed to continue hosting talks between Somaliland and Somalia. And finally, there is Egypt. In 2019, Egypt proposed a deal whereby it would establish a military base in Somaliland in exchange for international recognition. Somaliland declined this offer for several reasons. First, allowing Egypt to establish a military base would constitute an act of war against Ethiopia, and Somaliland was concerned about the potential security and economic consequences of this deal. Second, Somaliland's security and economic cooperation with Ethiopia would be jeopardized, resulting in the loss of Ethiopia's diplomatic and practical support, which would be detrimental to Somaliland. Third, if relations between Somaliland and Ethiopia were to deteriorate, the UAE's interest in the region would be damaged. Egypt is nowhere near the economic or security partner to Somaliland that Ethiopia is, and Egypt has historically maintained a close alliance with Somalia and consistently supported Somalia's unity. At the same time, however, Egypt's geostrategic interests lie in the Red Sea region, which means it cannot ignore Somaliland. Given this context, Egypt has engaged in diplomatic engagement with Somaliland despite Somalia's concern. Egypt's interests in Somaliland are to counter Ethiopia's regional influence, to secure access to the Nile by being close to Ethiopia's capital, and to control the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, which are essential for the security of the Suez Canal. In light of its strategic interests, Egypt responded to the Ethiopian-Somaliland agreement by emphasizing the same need to respect Somalia's territorial integrity voiced by Somalia's other allies. The Egyptian foreign minister cautioned that any escalating action or statements from neighboring countries could undermine the stability in the Horn of Africa. Due to the fact that Egypt's response was diplomatically restrained due to the lack of condemnation on the continent and the nature of the MoU, it appears that Egypt remains keen to maintain its diplomatic relations with Somaliland and cut off Ethiopia from gaining sea access at any point that it can.
So you could say that we are in a stage where now we more or less completed the draft agreement from our technical point of view in the committee. And we have forwarded now that documents into the legal team, which the government of Somaliland have hired to look into it and to make sure that the documents is in line with our principles and our constitutions. And hopefully, we're hoping for the near future that the two sides will be in a stage where they can enter into the formal agreement.
arrintaasi waxay baraysaa oo ay baaraysaa in labada dhinacba Ethiopia-Somaliland ay ka go'an tahay in agreementka la saxo oo hortiida loo gudaxeed uu howlo.
As Ethiopia and Somaliland navigate the complexities of this partnership, the success of the MoU will depend on their ability to address security concerns, ensure equitable economic benefits on both sides, and manage the diplomatic fallout with neighboring countries. If implemented effectively, the deal could not only bolster Somaliland's quest for international recognition, but also contribute to greater stability and prosperity in the Horn of Africa.